Good evening, and welcome to the Way Out Show. I'm your host, Dane McCarthy, broadcasting to you from FEMA Region 5, deep in the bowels of the United Police State of Amnesia. Today is August 5th, 2016. The Democratic Convention is over. Hillary Clinton got her bounce in the polls, and she's a little bit ahead of Donald Trump. That's the horse race. That's what we would expect, and that's what we'll see up to November unless something amazing happens which changes everything. Who knows what could happen? We live in very unstable times, and they're unstable for a reason. They're unstable because there are very powerful forces that wish these times to be unstable and are working very hard to achieve that goal globally. And these people are the owner class. They own the planet. They own us. And what is their ultimate goal? More control, more power, and ultimately the almost total destruction of modern society and a return to a rewilded world with a small group of them, their friends, their relatives, their associates, their colleagues, and their slaves, essentially. In a world which will be divided up between these godlike beings, because that's what they'll be, or that's what they hope to be, who will divide up the world into little fiefdoms, who will run the entire planet as they see fit, with total power, essentially kings, with perhaps one major overarching emperor at the very top. And that's whether or not that'll happen, I mean, we don't know, of course. That's the future. We can only speculate what will happen in the future. That may not happen at all. What we may see instead is a continuation of the struggle, the constant struggle between those who want to rule us and those who resist being ruled. Those who want to survive and prosper, and those who also want to survive and prosper, but want other people not to survive and prosper. Remember the Georgia Guidestones. The very first suggestion or commandment or prediction, whatever you want to call it, at the very top is that the goal would be to have the entire world population at 500 million people. Yes, I'm not talking about the population of the United States. I'm talking about the total global population of 500 million people. That is what the Georgia Guidestones state. You can go down to Georgia and look at them for yourself, which I have done. Enormous granite Stonehenge on a hill, deliberately put up back in the late 80s, been there a long time. They are surveilled with cameras so that people cannot get away with defacing them and throwing red paint on them and scrawling, no new world order and this type of thing that have been scrawled on them in the past, and they're always scrubbed off. Somebody is taken care of. No one knows for sure who built the Georgia Guidestones. You can look online, you can see them, you can read what the Georgia Guidestones say. It's a message to humanity, very much deliberately, in several different languages, so that most people will not have to have the message translated for them. But it's very clear, and It is, now maybe you'll agree with the message. Maybe you like the idea that only 500,000 people, half a million, half a billion, 500 million would exist in the entire world. A lot of people probably would think that was great. You know, they may not understand the means that are being used to bring about this ultimate goal. And those means are not legal by any standard, because these people are essentially above the law. Anyway, they consider themselves to be above the law. That's how they operate. They know they are above the law. They believe they have the right to be above the law. And we have to think back to kings and princes and emperors of the past who believed that their right to rule was actually divinely ordered, the divine right of kings. So they're closer to God than we are, they believe. And so they can do what they want. They're godlike. Now, the way that the owner class wants to become godlike nowadays is through technology. They already have access to the best health care in the world. And an example of that would be President Carter, who had the brain tumor. He's 91. And yet he was given a treatment, immunotherapy, that cured his brain tumor. It was metastasized. It was not just in his brain, it was in several places in his body. And yet he was given a treatment which cured him, and he's still alive today and doing well. His tumors were completely destroyed by his own body. And how did that happen? That happened because he was given a treatment that you don't hear about, which is essentially a cure for cancer. Yes, you heard me right. It's a cure for cancer. And it has to do with oxygenating the blood through various means. Because once you oxygenate the blood to a high level of oxygen content, that powers up your immune system. It supercharges it, and it goes to work, and it cleans you out, it fixes you up, it heals you. Because you know, drugs do not heal you. Doctors do not heal you. Your body heals you. Your body is the healer. And once you give your body the tools to help it to heal you, it will heal you. That's what your body wants to do. So now people will say, well, this doesn't work for everybody. But if it worked for a man who was 91, how about these teenagers? How about these kids with cancer? How about people who are half his age or 2/3 his age? What chance did they have to have that option? But would a doctor even suggest it for an ordinary person? Probably not. If he even heard of the cure that was applied to President Carter. But President Carter, being a former president, is a member of the elite ruling class. So he got the high-level technology, the latest technology. So that's just one example. But I guess I'm off the subject. I really wanted to talk about the election and where we are now. And I wanted to show you a clip between, it was on Democracy Now!, which is I don't usually watch because I have issues with Amy Goodman. But it's interesting because Chris Hedges is talking with a Hillary Clinton supporter, Robert Reich, who is a very, very loyal, although he claims to have supported Bernie. I have my doubts about that, whether he was really supporting Bernie. He probably knew from the beginning who Bernie was and what the purpose of Bernie's was. And that was to energize the young people to ultimately go for Hillary. Because the Democratic Party rigged the primaries so that Hillary Clinton would win. Hillary Clinton knew this, and she's been acting like she already had the nomination right from the very beginning of the primaries. So you can judge for yourself whether you think that Robert Reich is genuine or not. But I do think that Chris Hedges is genuine. I have some issues with both these men, but there's probably very few people I don't have some issues with the possible exception of Ralph Nader, although Ralph Nader, even him. But anyway, you can watch it and make up your own mind. It's about 18 minutes long, and then we'll get back to, and I'll make some comments about it. So let's roll that clip.
Continue to talk about the Democratic National Convention. We're joined now by two guests. Joining us from Berkeley, California is Robert Reich, who served as Labor Secretary under President Clinton and is a professor at the University of California, Berkeley. And here in Philadelphia is Chris Hedges, Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist. His most recent book is Wages of Rebellion, The Moral Imperative of Revolt. And I'd like to begin with Robert Reich. You were a Bernie Sanders supporter. You're now backing Hillary Clinton. You're not at the convention, but your perspective on what you saw last night and the possibility of the Democratic Party uniting behind Hillary Clinton or a group of the Sanders supporters going with Jill Stein.
Well, it's very hard to tell what the delegates are going to do, and it's very hard to tell, even harder to tell what the electorate is going to do. This is a very agonizing time for many Bernie Sanders supporters. With a great deal of reluctance initially, because I've known Hillary Clinton for 50 years, endorsed Bernie Sanders and worked my heart out for him, as many people did. And so at this particular juncture, there's a great deal of sadness and a great deal of feeling of regret. But having worked so long and so many years for basically the progressive ideals that Bernie Sanders stands for, I can tell you that the movement is going to continue. In fact, it's going to grow. And right now, at this particular point in time, I just don't see any alternative but to support Hillary. I know Hillary. I know her faults. I know her strengths. I think she will make a great president. I supported Bernie Sanders because I thought he would make a better president for the system we need. But nonetheless, Hillary Clinton is going to be the nominee. I support her. And I support her not only because she will be a good president, if not a great president, but also, frankly, because I am tremendously worried about the alternative. And the alternative, really, as a practical matter, is somebody who is a megalomaniac and a bigot, somebody who will set back the progressive movement decades, if not more.
Chris Hedges.
Well, reducing the election to personalities is kind of infantile at this point. The fact is we live in a system that Sheldon Wolin calls inverted totalitarianism. It's a system where corporate power has seized all of the levers of control. There is no way to vote against the interests of Goldman Sachs or ExxonMobil or Raytheon. We've lost our privacy. We've seen under Obama an assault against civil liberties that has outstripped what George W. Bush carried out. We've seen the executive branch misinterpret the 2001 authorization to use Military Force Act as giving itself the right to assassinate American citizens, including children. I speak of Anwar al-Awlaki's 16-year-old son. We have bailed out the banks, pushed through programs of austerity. This has been a bipartisan effort because they've both been captured by corporate power. We have undergone what John Ralston Saul correctly calls a corporate coup d'etat in slow motion, and it's over. I just came back from Poland, which is a kind of case study of how neoliberal poison destroys a society and creates figures like Trump. Poland has gone, I think we can argue, into a neo-fascism. First, it dislocated the working class, deindustrialized the country. Then, in the name of austerity, it destroyed public institutions, education, public broadcasting, and then it poisoned the political system. And we are now watching in Poland them create a 30 to 40,000 armed militia. They have an army. The parliament, nothing works. And I think that this political system in the United States has seized up in exactly the same form. So is Trump a repugnant personality? Yes, although I would argue that in terms of megalomania and narcissism, Hillary Clinton is not far behind. But the point is we've got to break away from, which is exactly the narrative they want us to focus on. We've got to break away from political personalities and understand and examine and critique the structures of power. And in fact, the Democratic Party, especially beginning under Bill Clinton, has carried water for corporate entities as assiduously as the Republican Party. This is something that Ralph Nader understood long before the rest of us and stepped out very courageously in 2000. And I think we will look back on that period and find Ralph to be an amazingly prophetic figure. Nobody understands corporate power better than Ralph. And I think now people have caught up with Ralph. And this is, of course, why I support Dr. Stein and the Green Party. We have to remember that 10 years ago, Syriza, which controls the Greek government, was polling at exactly the same spot that the Green Party is polling now, about 4%. We've got to break out of this idea that we can create systematic change within a particular election cycle. We've got to be willing to step out into the political wilderness, perhaps for a decade. But on the issues of climate change, on the issue of the destruction of civil liberties, including our right to privacy, and I speak as a former investigative journalist, which doesn't exist anymore because of wholesale government surveillance. We have no ability, except for hackers. I mean, this whole debate over the WikiLeaks is insane. Did Russia? I've printed classified material that was given to me by the Mossad, but I never exposed that Mossad gave it to me. Is what was published true or untrue? And the fact is, in those long emails, you should read them. They're appalling, including calling Dr. Cornel West trash. It exposes the way the system was rigged within. I'm talking about the Democratic Party, the denial of independence, the superdelegates, the stealing of the caucus in Nevada, the huge amounts of corporate money and super PACs that flowed into the Clinton campaign. The fact is, Clinton has a track record, and it's one that has abandoned children. I mean, she and her husband destroyed welfare as we know it, and 70% of the original recipients were children. This debate over, I don't like Trump, but Trump is not the phenomena. Trump is responding to a phenomena created by neoliberalism, and we may get rid of Trump, but we will get something even more vile, maybe Ted Cruz.
Robert Reich, I remember you on Democracy Now! Talking about your time as Labor Secretary when President Clinton signed off on welfare reform. And you described walking the streets of Washington, D.C., wondering where the protests were, that you had vigorously objected, and it was also an issue, a bill that Hillary Clinton had supported. So can you respond to Chris Hedges on these 3 points, including, so you take a walk in the political wilderness for a little while?
Well, Amy, it's not just taking a walk in the political wilderness. If Donald Trump becomes president, if that's what you're referring to, I think it is, there are irrevocable negative changes that will happen in the United States, including appointments to the Supreme Court, that will not be just political wilderness, that will actually change and worsen the structure of this country. I couldn't agree with Chris Hedges more about his critique overall of neoliberalism and a lot of the structural problems that we face in our political economy today. I've written about them, but I've done more than write about them. I've actually been in the center of power, and I have been doing everything I possibly can as an individual and also as a mobilizer and organizer of others to try to change what we now have. I think that voting for Donald Trump or equating Hillary Clinton with Donald Trump is insane. Donald Trump is certainly a product of a kind of system and a systematic undermining that has occurred in the United States for years with regard to inequality of income and wealth and political power. But we don't fight that by simply saying, all right, let's just have Donald Trump and hope that the system improves itself and hope that things are so bad that actually people rise up in armed resistance. That's insane. That's crazy. What we have to do is we've got to be very, very strategic as progressives. We've got to look at the long term. We've got to understand that Bernie Sanders brought us much further along than we were before the Sanders campaign. We owe a lot to Bernie Sanders, his courage, his integrity, his power, the fact that most people under 30 voted for Bernie Sanders. In fact, if you look at the people who voted for Bernie Sanders under 30, that was more people than voted for Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton together under the age of 30. We are building a progressive movement in this country. But over the next 4 years, I don't want Donald Trump to irretrievably make it difficult, if not impossible, for us to move forward with that progressive movement. Now, I understand Hillary Clinton is not perfect. I've known her, as I said before, for 50 years. I met her when she was 19 years old. I know her strengths, and I know pretty well her weaknesses. She is not perfect. And as Chris says, you know, she is also very much a product of many of the problems structurally in this country right now. We fight those structural problems. Yes, hand in hand, Chris, with you, shoulder to shoulder. I'm very short. Maybe it's my shoulder and it's your rib cage. But it doesn't matter. We continue to fight. I will continue to fight. Many people who are watching and listening will continue to fight. We must continue to mobilize. I hope Bernie Sanders does what he implied he would do last night, and that is carry the movement forward, lend his name, his energy, his email list. This is not the end of anything, but we have got to be, at the same time, very practical about what we're doing and very strategic about what we're doing. This is not just a matter of making statements. It's a matter of actually working with and through and changing the structure of power in this country.
Chris, I'd like to ask you, you've written that liberals are tolerated by the capitalist elites because they do not question the virtues of corporate capitalism, only its excesses, and call for tepid and ineffectual reforms. Could that have also been said of FDR in the 1930s? Because you were one of the folks who did not back Bernie Sanders from the beginning. So well,
I didn't back Bernie Sanders because, and Shama Sawan and I had had a discussion with him before, because he said that he would work within the democratic structures and support the nominee. I think we have now watched Bernie Sanders walk away from his political moment. You know, I think he will come to deeply regret what he has done. He has betrayed these people who believed in this political revolution. We heard the same kind of rhetoric, by the way, in 2008 around Obama. A political campaign raises consciousness, but it's not a movement. And what we are seeing now is furious spin. I listened to Ben Jealous just do it, from the self-identified liberal class. And they are tolerated within a capitalist system because in a moment like this, they are used to speak to people to get them to betray their own interests in the name of fear. And I admire Robert and have read much of his stuff and like his stuff, but if you listen to what he's been saying, the message is the same message of the Trump campaign, and that is fear. And that is all the Democrats have to offer now and all the Republicans have to offer now. And the fact is, from climate change alone, we have no time left. I have 4 children. The future of my children, by the day, is being destroyed because of the fact that the fossil fuel industry, along with the animal agriculture industry, which is also as important in terms of climate change are destroying the ecosystem on which we depend for life, and neither party has any intention to do anything about it.
What should Bernie Sanders have done?
Bernie Sanders should have walked out and run as an independent. And defied the Democratic Party.
Take up the invitation of Dr. Jill Stein and run on the ticket.
She offered to let him run on the top of the ticket. That's what he should have done. And the fact is, let's not forget that Bernie has a very checkered past. He campaigned for Clinton in '92. He campaigned for Clinton again in '96, after NAFTA, the greatest betrayal of the working class in this country since the Taft-Hartley Act of 1948. After the destruction of welfare, after the omnibus crime bill that exploded the prison population, and we now have, it's just a monstrosity what we've done. 300 to 50,000 to 400,000 people locked in cages in this country are severely mentally ill. Half of them never committed a violent crime. That's all Bill Clinton, and yet he went out and campaigned. In 2004, he called on Nader not to run, to step down, so we could support a war candidate like John Kerry. And I'm listening to Jealous before talk about the Iraq War. 60% of the Democratic senators voted for the war, including Hillary Clinton. The idea that somehow Democrats don't push us into war defies American history.
Robert Reich.
Well, all I can say is that at this particular point in time, again, many of the things that Chris Hedges is saying, I completely agree with. The real question here is, what do we do right now? And what do we do to mobilize and organize a lot of people out there who right now are not mobilized and organized? And how do we keep the energy building? I disagree with Chris with regard to Bernie Sanders. I think Bernie Sanders has been a great and is a great leader right now of the progressive cause. What I think we ought to do is develop a third party outside the Democratic and Republican parties, maybe the Green Party, so that in the year 2020, 4 years from now, we have another candidate. It may be Bernie Sanders. I think he's probably going to be too old by then. But we have a candidate that holds the Democrats accountable, that provides a vehicle for a lot of the energy of the Bernie Sanders movement to continue to develop, that fields new candidates at the Senate, in Congress, at the state level, that actually holds Democrats' feet to the fire and Republicans' feet to the fire, that develops an agenda of getting big money out of politics and severing the link between extraordinarily concentrated wealth and political power in this country. That's what we ought to be doing. Now we can, but in order to do that, we cannot have, and I think that Hillary will be a good president, if not a great president. This is not just trucking in fear, Chris. But I do fear Donald Trump. I fear the polls that I saw yesterday. Now, polls, again, this early in a campaign, we're still months away from the election, but they are indicative. They show Donald Trump doing exceedingly well, beating Hillary Clinton. And right now, given our two-party system, given our winner-take-all system with regard to the Electoral College, it's just too much of a risk to go and to say, well, I'm going to vote. I'm not going to vote for the lesser of two evils. I'm going to vote exactly what I want to do. Well, anybody can do that, obviously. This is a free country. You vote what you vote your conscience. You have to do that. I'm just saying that your conscience needs to be aware that if you do not support Hillary Clinton, you are increasing the odds of a true, clear, and present danger to the United States, a menace to the United States. And you're increasing the possibility that there will not be a progressive movement. There will not be anything we believe in the future, because the United States will really be changed for the worse. That's not a risk I'm prepared to take at this point in time. I'm going to do exactly what I've been doing for the last 40 years. I'm going to continue to beat my head against the wall, to build and contribute to building a progressive movement. The day after Election Day, I am going to try to work with Bernie Sanders and anybody else who wants to work in strengthening a third party. And again, maybe it's the Green Party for the year 2020, and do everything else I was just talking about about. But right now, as we lead up to Election Day 2016, I must urge everyone who is listening or who is watching to do whatever they can to make sure that Hillary Clinton is the next president and not Donald Trump.
All right. Well, I hope you enjoyed that. I thought it was fairly interesting. I like Chris Hedges' detail. He talks in specifics. He mentions important issues that people tend to forget. After all, we do live in the United Police state of amnesia. Americans tend to forget things. I mean, it's very human. We do have so much coming at us at all times that it's hard to keep everything straight. And a guy like Chris Hedges is obviously brilliant, has his finger on important events from the past. He understands them. He knows how to put them together. He makes a cogent argument. What I thought about Robert Reich was that he was pretending to be a progressive, a liberal, a future-oriented, very concerned about the welfare of ordinary people, but he seems to me to be bought and paid for by the moneyed interests, by the ruling class, by the owner class, and he has a role that he's playing. And he presents himself as a true blue Bernie supporter who believes in Bernie, but then he switched when Bernie dropped out and went to Hillary Clinton. Why? And he tells us why. Okay, so he says, well, it's because Trump is so awful. Trump is so terrible. Trump is this. Trump is that. I'm surprised he didn't call him a racist. Well, according to Chris Hedges, he doesn't think there's a whole lot of difference between either one of the two candidates. And this is why he goes for Jill Stein. Okay, I've listened to some of what Jill Stein has to say. She's a very nice woman. She seems very honest, straightforward. I like her message. She has that same aura of honesty and truth-telling about her, which is so refreshing, that we see in somebody like Ralph Nader. And actually, Trump uses this also. Someone who is not so boxed in, so caged, that they can only speak in very well-rehearsed sound bites that sound so phony. I mean, this is the way that Obama has been throughout the entire 8 years. He's so cautious with what he says. He tries to say the exact right thing all the time. And I don't know if Obama has actually ever made a mistake and gone off message to any great extent. What I have seen with Obama is that he has almost a boyish trickster side to him. That there's something behind his mask of solemnity. He's very stern. He's aged a lot since he got to be president. His hair is gray, his face is lined with the cares, the burden of office. This happens to every president, especially one that has been in for 8 years. And we see him just looking very tired. I don't know if he really is tired, if that's part of the act, or if he even looks kind of depressed. I don't know if he's really depressed or not, if that's just part of the act too. I'm really not sure. Maybe he's depressed because he wants people to think he's very unhappy with the situation because of Trump. Trump seems to be making people very unhappy. Around the country, people who like Obama, who like Hillary, are so vociferous, and they feel a necessity to use every epithet that they could possibly come up with to try to disparage Donald Trump. And it's not enough that they would disparage Donald Trump, but they must disparage anyone who supports Donald Trump. I mean, I was just reading an article in the New York Times today. An opinion piece, true, but prominent, and basically saying, if you are supporting Donald Trump, you are a racist, because Donald Trump is a racist. And I haven't seen any evidence that Donald Trump is a racist. It makes no sense that he would be a racist. Why would Donald Trump be a racist? Because he said that Mexicans, some Mexicans who coming over the border were racist. He didn't say they all were. He said that he didn't say that all Mexicans coming over the border were rapists. He said some were. And I think what he was talking about, if I remember correctly, from the actual clip that quote was taken from, he said, I read an article, and they're raping the women who they take over the border. He's talking about the coyotes. And, you know, it's unfortunate that he said this, but is this really that bad? When it is, I think it's probably true. Because so many men, if they are put in a position of authority or a position of power, will take advantage of that power to take what they want, which would be they would rape. This is unfortunate, but we see it over and over and over and over again. I used to think that professors were almost godlike beings. I mean, I had so much respect for professors. This is when I was very, very young, a young college student. Well, I find out later that many of these are just as flawed as everyone else, or more flawed, and they are using, some of them, using their position of authority and power and the trust that the students have in them to take advantage of that trust and to molest or exploit, let's say, the women, their female students. And we just see this type of thing happening over and over and over and over and over, and it's just never ending. And so you think, well, what about people like in political power? Then you look at that and you see, well, the same thing is happening with them. Maybe it's boys, maybe it's girls, young men, young women, anybody who has control, police officers, military. The situation with women in the military is appalling in terms of the exploitation that they suffer. And it makes me wonder, why would any woman even want to join the military, considering the statistics? They're horrible, they're awful. So for Trump to make a comment about rapists coming over the border, taking people over the border, does not seem out of line particularly. But this is the way that he is being smeared, and the smear campaign has ramped up to such an extent that it's becoming absurd, and I think people are seeing through it. They're seeing that the media is biased, and the media wants Hillary Clinton to win. And why does the media want Hillary Clinton to win? Because the people who own the media feel more comfortable with her at the helm. And this is where I might disagree with Chris Hedges, because it indicates the fact that Trump is despised by very powerful figures in the Republican Party, despised by the owners of media, the owner class who run media. Remember, that's just a very small group of men who own 90% of the media, the state-run media, the media that colludes together almost as a single entity. They try to get their message straight so that it's harmonized across the board. They have a common agenda, and they work very well toward that agenda. They know how human psychology works. They know that if humans look at all these different news sources, and all the main news sources, the news sources they trust to tell them the truth, if they are harmonized, if they agree, then it is just natural for a human being to say, well, it must be true. There's so many different sources who are agreeing. They are in agreement. We have a consensus. But is it a real consensus, or is it a fake consensus? And one thing we're seeing is that the alternative media, those citizen journalists who are growing every day by the thousands around the world, there are literally millions of citizen journalists operating around the world. And people would say, oh, they're not legitimate. Well, who says they're not legitimate? Yeah, the people who run the 5 major media outlets, they are the ones who say that the citizen journalists are not legitimate. The reason why the citizen journalism movement is so powerful and growing is because there's an enormous information gap which has opened up. It's the lie of omission, which we see so much in major news outlets, like, for instance, the New York Times, which will not directly lie to you because its reputation is on the line. It simply won't tell you what it doesn't want you to hear. It just doesn't talk about it. It just ignores it, the situation, the news story, whatever it might be. There's a selection process that goes on every day in any newsroom, on any newspaper. And that selection process, and they can say it's perfectly unbiased, but it's virtually impossible to be virtually unbiased. To be unbiased, completely unbiased. It's so difficult. How would you do that? No one can be unbiased. What one person thinks is unbiased, another person might think is biased. And maybe even in the same newsroom, on the same editorial board. They may disagree. Oh, I think we should run the story. Well, why? No, we're not going to run that story. That will make us look too biased. And the other person might say, well, no, I don't think it will. And they both have biases. So a gap has emerged, an enormous information gap, which is being filled nature abhors a vacuum in a very natural way by citizen journalists. Are these people getting paid? Many of them are not. Or maybe if they get popular enough, they start to pick up ad revenue. That just happens automatically, I guess. They start, being eligible for ads to show up. They don't have to. People want to put ads on their site. Maybe they would go for that. So they start making a living doing it. It's possible to make a living. Even though they're not publishing any particular newspaper or particular magazine or newsletter, they're just putting on their show. So we are fulfilling a need, and anyone who doesn't look at alternative media is missing out on an enormous slice of the action, of the information. They're not getting the full picture, and it's absolutely necessary to get as full and complete picture of what is going on in the world as you can in order to make an informed decision about how you will go. How will you vote, for instance? Now, some people would say there is no hope, that the elections are completely controlled. We have this threat of the Diebold electronic voting machines, which are not used around here, fortunately, but they can be so easily manipulated to switch the vote from one candidate to the other. Now, do both sides, the Republicans and Democrat, both manipulate the voting? I would say yes, they probably do. So for one candidate to truly win legitimately, they have to win in a landslide. They have to overwhelm whatever level of fraud has been put in place to prevent that win from happening. And so this is the only way it can work. When you have it really close, like we've had it in the past, like for instance the Al Gore versus George W. Bush 2000 election, then it is relatively easy to make the decision about who will win the election. And ultimately, in that case, it was the Supreme Court. One of the most egregious acts that a Supreme Court has ever made, to actually make that decision and stop that vote counting. Just the whole thing was a train wreck from the beginning, and we've had the most horrific results globally ever since. Now, this is not to say that Al Gore would have been any different. I mean, would 9/11 have happened? Probably. Would Dick Cheney have been vice president? No. That would have been something to be profoundly hoped. Would someone else have taken over control of the White House on the day of 9/11, who also would run the show, the big show of 9/11? While Al Gore was off in Florida reading a story to grade school kids, innocently reading a story. Oh, I didn't have anything to do with it. I'm just reading this story about a pet goat to some kids. It wasn't me. I wasn't involved. Who knows? We'll never know. We have to live with the hand that we've been dealt and deal with the situation as it has emerged and is being played out in 2016. One thing I think it's important to understand is that certain candidates believe that an enormous catastrophe is coming. And they're thinking of it as a global catastrophe as a result of climate change, that the planet is going to heat up so much that there's going to be a 9-foot rise in sea level by 2050. Jill Stein actually said this. I heard her in an interview, and I noticed that Robert Reich, well, no, it was Chris Hedges, I think, that mentioned, with a lot of fear, I thought, this possibility that this catastrophe was going to come about. A 9-foot sea level rise by 2050. Okay, so we're in 2016 now. So what is it, 34 years we have? Now we have to remember, though, that the people, the consensus of scientists, which is really not a consensus at all, and the people, the so-called scientists, they're influenced by the politics. The use of global warming as a political tool is a fact. This was a decision that was made back in the 80s by political figures, Maurice Strong among them, very powerful figures. They decided to use climate change as the new lever to help them change the world in a direction that they wanted it to change. It was just like World War I. I mean, you could almost use the example of World War I. What was World War I about? No one really knows what it was about. It just happened. Or did it? I mean, World War I, which inevitably led to World War II. Can you imagine if the 20th century had neither World War I nor World War II? What would the world look like? Yes, we could say we know why World War II happened because of Hitler. But World War I is an entirely different case. And it seems to be that it was because there were treaties that were honored by various countries that if there were aggression by one country, then they would, on another country, then they would come to the aid of that country. And so they did. So all these countries piled in, and they beat the drums of war, and they raised enormous numbers of young men and sent them to fight each other. And it was because of these treaties. There was really no reason why it happened. There was a spark, which is usually attributed to the assassination of Archduke Ferdinand, but that was only the spark. That was only the trigger. That didn't directly cause it. It was like no one ultimately knows. And there's been a lot of interest in what caused World War I. And we're thinking, why would today be necessarily any different? Why did World War I happen in the first place? Because there were powerful forces that wanted it to happen. That's ultimately what it is. And these were leadership people in positions of power. Again, the elite, the ruling class, the owners, they wanted it to happen. They could have stopped it, but they didn't. Now we see the same thing happening. I mean, you have the issue of climate change. You have the issue of global warming. Is it real? Many, many people, many scientists believe that the Earth has not been in a warming phase at all for quite a while. Others would say, well, the Earth has been warming since the end of the Ice Age. And that would be, I don't know, 15 to 25,000 years ago, somewhere in that vicinity. The Ice Age ended. And our civilization has blossomed in the interim period. Ultimately, the Earth will have another ice age. This is inevitable. It has to do with a pulsing of the sun, cycles of the sun. The sun gets warmer, the sun gets colder. The sun has an 11-year cycle. It has other cycles too. It has shorter cycles, it has longer cycles, and extremely long cycles. So we live in a very active area of space. The sun is fairly young. It's unstable. The actual amount of influence that human civilization has on the climate is very minimal, extremely minimal. Even if there were a genuine effect that human activity has on the climate, it would be minimal. And I've heard numbers as low as 6%. If all of the carbon dioxide that humans emit was stopped, that it would only change the climate about 6%. That's how much of an influence that human activity has on the planet. So it really wouldn't change things that much. Volcanic activity and other natural forces have a much greater effect on the climate than humans. Yeah, believe it or not, one volcano can put enough carbon dioxide and carbon into the atmosphere more than humans could in many, many years. Now, there's nothing wrong with humans cutting back on poisons. There are plenty of poisons. That has to be done. Like depleted uranium. We're poisoning the planet. That should be what is addressed. But no, that's not addressed at all. It's carbon dioxide that's the villain. In reality, it's these poisons, thousands and thousands of chemicals and poisons like depleted uranium that were spreading around the whole world and killing people and killing animals. Okay, so that's all. I've run out of time. But we'll see you next week, and sleep well, friends.